It will be available on the Sister Circle Writers website in our private group. And so today we are going to talk about answering calls for submissions, calls for submissions related to academic work and creative works. And so Dr. Cerise Glenn is going to talk about the role of what an editor looks for. And then Dr. Kimberly Johnson, she's going to talk about her writing process and being an author. And both Cerise, Dr. Cerise and Dr. Kimberly, they're both published authors, and they've submitted and answered calls and that sort of thing. But what I want to do, I'm going to share my screen because we have a lot of, we have poets here, we have screenwriters here, we have artists in this circle. And so I'm going to share my screen because I want you to see, let's see, advanced, where are you? I want you to see where you can find works. So one area, if you notice, we're going through this COVID-19. The United Nations actually had a call for creatives to help develop and build some of their messaging. And so there are ways and places, if you are a creative, whether it's through arts, painting, that sort of thing. So they've done that already, but keep your eye out for that. And then here's another place where you can check out creative works. So if you can see this, newpages.com, can you guys see that? Classifieds, yes. Writing programs, events. So anyway, here, call for submissions.
Oh, wow.
Writing, art, book-length manuscripts, photography, magazines, publishers, writing conferences, all those different things. So essays, poems. I know there were some on the call yesterday that they were writing about issues with domestic violence. So there are calls for that, looking for that. Different journals, different places for you to publish and get your voice out. But make sure you are reading the call to know exactly what it is that they're looking for, so you don't send your work in vain. Now this is to have it published by someone else, but always remember you can self-publish your own and promote your own work as well. So this is for our creatives who are not necessarily writing for an academic audience, and for our academics who want to take a break from that kind of writing and have their work seen in other places. So this is where you can go. It is just filled with all kinds of things here. And so this is calls, they're writing contests. So again, that's newpages.com. And let's see, writing contests, if you're looking for that. And there's always some kind of prize money involved. You never know. Write it, submit it, and see what happens. You might win. And even with some of the submissions for the magazines and online journals in this space, they might pay you anywhere from, they might pay you $25 to have it and you're published. And your work is out there and it's being seen by others. So, you know, just, you can start somewhere, so there's no stopping you in getting your work published. You just have to write it and put it out there. So this is one of the spaces. And so when you're thinking about answering a call, when your work is out there, sometimes you will be invited to publish. And so I was recently invited to publish in the American Medical Association's Journal of Ethics. And so one of their editors saw another one of my works and thought I would be a good fit for the journal. So they invited me to—
That's awesome.
Thank you. So they invited me to publish there. So that's what I'm going to be working on that abstract today and tomorrow. I'm going to finish that up. So I'm going to do that and get that finished. So I just wanted you to be aware that for our creatives, and you're looking to do some work that's not academic and you want a place for it to be published, this is a great resource. And the other thing you should consider is looking at some of the other organizations to join to see what's going on. So like for at least in my discipline, there's the National Communication Association, and then all the regional associations, and then all the journals that go along with that will have some sort of call for you to submit your work. And then there are books that are being written that people are taking on that are edited works, and you might be able to submit a chapter. So I know myself and Dr. Cerise is working on an edited book with me, and Dr. Kimberly Johnson, who is a single published author in her own right, is also a contributor to that work. So I'm really excited about looking at womanist theology and creating a beloved community, more so than ever because of what is going on in our community with Black life. It's just trying to figure out how do we have love when Black bodies are a commodity at the same time that they are just expendable. And that is a conundrum and perplexing to me. So anyway, the God of the universe, the one that I know, values Black life. And we're just I'm gonna put that there, let you ponder that, because remember, we're the keepers of our history and herstory, and we have to write from our perspectives and make sure that's out there. So I'm gonna stop sharing right now, and I am going to have Dr. Glenn talk about the eyes of an editor, what an editor is going to look for. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Cerise Glenn, University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Dr. Annette, for putting this together. You've done such a great job of putting together great resources that I will keep using after our sessions end. And also, before I start, to give a shout out to what just came in the mail yesterday.
Yay! That is Dr. Kimberly P. Johnson's book.
So I'm excited to dig through that.
I'm going to put together a list of just the bibliography of the presenters. And if you are a participant and you have something that you want on that list for us to look at, read, we have to support each other's work.
Yes,
send that to me and I will put that on the list and then post it on the website. Thank you.
Yes, this is a great space that's been put together for us to support each other, share each other's work, and move together as we're working on our goals. So I want to share a little bit about myself as an editor. So I do quite the range of work in academic writing. I'm mostly an academic writer for where I am right now in my career. My research area is organizational communication and intercultural communication by discipline. So one of the areas I focus on is career socialization and advancement of diverse groups in higher education and in various careers. I also do work from a Black feminist and womanist perspective. So I have a foot in the academic world and in the applied world, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's the creative writing that some of you do. So some of the applied projects are, I directed the faculty mentoring program at UNC Greensboro for 3 years. And I'm also the PI on $1 million NSF advanced grant, where we're working on reducing gender equity for women in the STEM field. Our project focuses on women in the STEM fields, but women of color from an intersectional perspective. So one of the speakers yesterday mentioned about how you have voice in a variety of projects. That's one way we're bringing voice into a very technical style of writing. So as I work on more creative pieces for academic writing, to data-driven pieces, which is qualitative and quantitative, some evaluation work, and also writing grants. So I do the range of more creative all the way to super statistical and technical when it comes to grant writing. As I've done that, I've also worked on editing collections, and I've developed a really thick skin for my work. Because some people are a little more creative. I'm an editorial board member for Women in Language. We give feedback as reviewers that's more supportive and creative in nature that helps people grow. So I edited a special issue on Michelle Obama and her leadership, and I also was the editor for the media section of that journal. That's very different from the types of reviews and comments you'll get from a grant, where it feels like they're just cutting you down to the bone. So I say that to say, as you're thinking about where you want to publish, think about how much of a thick skin you have, and if you're ready to submit your work to certain places. I'll mostly talk today from the editor's perspective, from editing the special issue of a journal and now an edited collection. And I also edited a journal called The Critical Half when I worked for Women for Women International in Washington, D.C. That's a journal that's quasi-academic, but also meant for people in the lay audience to understand. So some of that academic translational work. So being an editor for different types of journals in this collection has given me an interesting perspective on how people see their work and respond to feedback. So if you're submitting something and you get what's called a revise and resubmit, or they want you to make changes to it, the first thing I'll say is congratulations. That means you have strong potential to publish and that somebody sees something of value in your work. And sometimes, particularly women and people of color can suffer from imposter syndrome, and they take that feedback as I don't belong here, or this is a sign I'm not going to publish. No, take that as a sign of you've got potential. You may have work to do, but somebody's interested in your work. Because believe me, if nobody was interested from the editor point of view, you would have got a rejection. Or as I like to call it, a declination. Rejection sounds mean. So if you got that revisions, first thing is congratulate yourself and think, yes, this is a good place for me to put resources so I can work on developing the project. One of the first things I'll say about when you're submitting your revisions, to make sure you make it clear how you've made changes based on the editor's feedback. That could be as simple as a cover letter, or sometimes they like track changes. But as editors are reviewing multiple submissions, sometimes we get 8 to 10 or more at a time. We won't remember exactly what we said without looking at our version of the manuscript. So if you have it somewhere we can follow you, that's really helpful. The second thing I would recommend is make sure you address all the suggestions and comments. Now, that does not mean you have to agree with all of them. Mm-hmm. So I would start with the ones that are the simplest to fix and explain how you fix them. Now, for those of us who review a lot of work, we've always heard about dreaded reviewer 2. Is sometimes you have to figure out if reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 are telling you mixed things. Address both sets of feedback and explain why you're making the decision you're making. So for instance, you may get feedback that says, I need to know more about your methods and more about this particular project. Well, I can write back and say, I have this data, however, I only have so many pages to work with. So if you want me to stay within this word count, are you giving me more word count? Or are you telling me I need to cut something else? And if so, what should I cut? So it's not that you don't have the data, you just were trying to stay within the parameters, particularly for special issues and for books. So when people submit work, we may say, make it 20, 25 pages, so many words, but somebody may come in short, which means as an editor, I can give you their pages. So if you let me know, no, I'm not fixing it, then that comes across as this person doesn't want to work with me. But if it's, I have the information, but I didn't include it because I didn't want to go over the page limit, it's a different set of feedback. So I can say, okay, I can give you an extra page. So think of it as a dialogue for someone who's trying to help you get published. But don't ignore the content saying, if I do this, I won't go over the page limit. Just tell the editor what's happening. You can also email the editor before you submit your revisions if you have questions. Because at this point, we're interested in your work. So if you have that kind of question, we're happy to help. One of the things also to keep in mind for an edited collection, particularly if it has a special theme or focus, is that some of your suggestions for revisions may have more to do with how your piece connects to other pieces or answers the call than the actual merit of your work. So I know sometimes people get sensitive to the feedback, but I'm reading a piece, let's say Annette sent something in, Kimberly sent something in, I'm like, wow, these pieces really connect here. So if Kim can say a little more about this, and Annette can say a little more about this, I can put these pieces together in the book. So that has nothing to do with your writing at all. It's just a matter of how can we make this collection come together. The fourth tip I'll give is to keep in mind that a revise and resubmit does not mean acceptance yet. So even though you do the work, there's a possibility it still may not be published, which is why I would say if you have questions about the feedback, just to make sure you ask those questions and to answer all of them, because sometimes what makes a difference between being published or not is the person just not responding to the feedback we're giving them. Or it means you're setting yourself up to have multiple sets of revisions. And if editors are saying the same thing over and over, at a certain point, we have to submit the project. So even if your work has potential, if we're up against deadlines, our series editor or the editor of the journal may say, I need your stuff by next week. We react to this deadline. And so if you haven't done all the revisions, it may not be published in that special issue, not because it doesn't have potential, but because you just didn't do the work in enough time for it to be published. Which also leads me to the fifth point, which is if you can't return the manuscript by the requested timeline, say something as soon as possible. Because we get it. And if everybody has the same deadline, I can't read 8 of these in the same day. So it's okay if you need an extra couple of weeks, sometimes even a month. Just let us know what's happening. Because if we know early on, I can tell the series editor we may need an extension. But if you don't respond and miss the deadline, we don't know how to take that. That could mean you're no longer interested in publishing with us. And if that's the case, then we'll say, okay, we haven't heard from this person. I guess we have to move on. And then we may work to find a replacement piece for what's missing. So if you come back a few months later when we already have somebody else, then you've missed that opportunity. So I'll say, take a minute just to say, hey, I need more time. Then the last thing I'll say for point 6, if you get feedback, and sometimes feedback can really, it'll hurt your feelings. Like you put your heart into it, you've worked really hard. If you do community engaged research, you've been in the community, you've gone through IRB if you're doing human subject research, or if you're doing something autoethnographic, it's really close to you and touches your soul as you're putting that out in writing. And that can be a difficult thing to say, to publish. And I'll tell people that are surprised to hear me say, the feedback I get on my grants is actually the easiest feedback to get. The hardest feedback for me to take is the feedback where I put myself in the piece. It's always easier for me to tell somebody else's story. So my data, qualitative and quantitative driven stuff is the easiest stuff for me to review from an emotional point of view. When I have stuff that I'm really, really tied to, the net has been on the receiving end of this request, ask a colleague to take a look at it first. Because sometimes those comments feel harsh, but when somebody else looks at it, they're like, no, seriously, all they're saying is divide this in 2 separate sections. Or all they're saying is this doesn't fit here. If it doesn't fit, it should be in a different piece. And then when you get somebody else's perspective, it really helps you put on that editor eye. And if you have a mentor, a colleague or a mentor is a good way to read the revisions, or even if it says, hey, that dreaded reviewer 2 says this, how should I respond? So to give yourself time to give that feedback, particularly if you're going to disagree with a reviewer. Like, what's a good way for me to frame, I hear your suggestion, but here's why I'm not going to do that in this piece. And I want to save time for I have quick tips so people can tell me about what you're working on, and I can have more of a dialogue and discussion if time permits.
All right. So thank you, Dr. Glenn. If you have questions, you can put them, just put them in the chat, and I'll read them out and make them available. So we can all see that chat there. But yeah, it's as an editor, one of the things you don't want to do is not respond to the deadlines and not respond to the suggestions for making corrections and sending your best work. It is not the editor's job to fix, every grammatical error in your work or put in your citations correctly. That is your job as the author of the piece. So when you're answering a call, you need to make sure it's like, okay, do they want this in APA? Should it be an MLA? And even for creative writers, if there's a way that you need to document somebody else's ideas, because you don't want to plagiarize or anything like that. You want to give credit to someone else's ideas. You need to say that. So just making sure that you're clear and that's done. And if you receive an invitation to submit, that is not a carte blanche to add other people on. You as the individual were asked to submit work to a book or a journal, or even to present on a conference panel. So that invitation is for you. It's not really to add other people onto that work. So someone saw something that maybe you presented or spoke to you, and they want your ideas. So that is significant to remember that as well. And that's just one of those academic courtesy kind of rules or unspoken rules that are written for that. So that's my 2 cents as I segue into Dr. Kimberly Johnson and her writing process and how she answers calls. Dr. Glenn, did you have something else?
Somebody put a question in the chat room I wanted to talk to really briefly.
Okay, all right, let's see.
It was about a grant for the U.S. Embassy.
Okay.
So the grant that I have is a federal grant. So it's for the National Science Foundation. And thank you, Annette, for putting in the PI stands for Principal Investigator. I'm not as familiar with this particular grant, the Central American Regional Security Initiative grant, but I could take a look at it. But I'll say for federal grants, one of the main things to keep in mind is that you're writing for people who may have no clue what you do. So it's different from, so if we're doing a special issue in communication studies, we all know the field of communication studies. So part of what, I'm not sure, Tracy, what your research area is, but from coming from a communication studies perspective, sometimes I have to spend a little time in the grant writing why I can do this work. So part of what the grant wants, not as much the creative side of it, but they want to know, can this person, do you have solid ideas, and can you do this work? So oftentimes when I give advice on working on grants, we do a writing retreat at UNCG, some of us came together and worked on a grant application. And women in particular, from looking at the research, aren't as braggy as they should be. So men have no problem saying, I am this award-winning scholar who does this. So this is a time where you need to show what you can do. And I got the same advice when I sent in my dossier for promotion and tenure. It's way too humble, brag. And I'm just not that way by nature. I'm just more humble by nature and more of a quiet type. So this is the point to say, brag on it. This is what I can do that somebody else can't. The other thing is to make sure that you're writing in particular to the specific call they want. So as somebody who likes to write a lot, the issue I have is I can write you a 10-page answer to your question, and they want you to condense that down to 3/4 of a page. Mm-hmm. So one of the techniques I use is something called reverse outlining. I will take the two, I just have to write it out. It's part of my process. Write it, and then take those paragraphs and summarize it in 1 sentence. And then take those 1 sentences, and that becomes your grant application. And it feels like it's lost some of the heart or the context, but that's how it's a good way to write the project. We just give them exactly what they need to know without more information that they're not going to read. The last thing I'll say is, if you need space in a grant, because oftentimes that's the trickiest part, is giving yourself space to fit their timeline, use appendices. Particularly if you can put it in a table or a graph or a chart, because you can summarize it in a picture a lot faster than you can write it. And if you want to add some context, you can just say, see Appendix A. And the appendices oftentimes don't count in your word count. So I've learned to take some of the content I want to say and put it in an appendix. And that way I can still stick to the word length. And then if you have time, have somebody read the grant who's familiar with your work, but who doesn't know what you're doing, because that'll help you figure out what needs to be explained. We all do this talking in our own language or acronyms. Like I said, PI, that means Principal Investigator. If you have somebody else read it, they'll tell you which acronyms you need to spell out and which things are, okay, I got that.
As a having reviewed federal grants, if you don't answer the questions, it goes in a recycling bin. Mm-hmm. They will not take the time to decipher and figure out what you're trying to say, because it's not, and it's a team of people that are reviewing these applications. And so if it's like, I don't know what they're talking about. We have 50 pages here. We only asked for 20. It's going in the trash. It's specifically in the piece. I mean, that's just how it works. It's specifically just answer the questions. Give us, can you do this? What, and then how much money do you really need? Mm-hmm. And who's going to be a part of this? So it's really important that you answer, you look at what the call is for the grant, and you are specific and concise. It is not an academic piece. They want it brief, they want it concise, and they just want, it's like business writing. They just want it straight down to the point. And appendices, that's a great way to put in some of the extra stuff, because then appendices, I don't really have to look at that unless I want to look at it, because it's not a part of the major document. So yeah, just yeah, it's a shame some things look good, but then again, we have 20 people trying to get this same, you know, $50,000, $100,000. So yeah. And
if you have a support system where you are, I would outsource some of the grant work. Like, I'm not the best at budgets, so I have somebody we have the OR Office of Research and Engagement. I made friends with our budget person, and he actually will do my budget for me. Mm-hmm. Because I'm just not the best at that, especially at calculated overhead and whatnot. No, I'm not doing that. So just make friends with the people you can outsource some of the parts to. And also stay persistent. 7 years to get this grant. So we went through lots of rejection.
Yeah, this is year 7 for me too. No, year 4. And this year I made everybody do their own budget.
Yeah, oh, good. That's smart. Yes.
Now, when you outsource some people, are you able to write in a fee to actually pay them, or are they just doing this out of the goodness of their hearts?
You can do both. So most federal grants will allow you to have a principal investigator. That's what I am. Your team of co-PIs who have big roles, but you also get a place where you can have personnel, key personnel, or you can write in a subcontractor. So if you're going to have somebody do that work for the period of the grant, put them in the budget. But I told them when I was asked to be the PI, I'm not doing y'all's budget. So we have somebody who said they're going to do it.
Sometimes we have to say, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm. But you can have space in the grant to pay, whether it's if you're at a university, it could be a grad assistant. Mm-hmm. Depending on how technical it is, you may just recommend, like somebody who's doing our budget is a staff person. We're just doing ad pay for her. So yeah, definitely if you can, put it in the budget. But for some people, like helping them work on your grant for the proposal development is part of their job. I didn't even know when I first got there that was part of their job. So they'll do it as part of their job responsibilities. But you can put it in a grant to pay them out of the grant as well.
All right, Dr. Johnson, let's talk about your process, your writing process and answering calls and just everything wonderful that you do. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, hi everyone. I am Dr. Kimberly Johnson. I teach at Tennessee State University. It is in Nashville, Tennessee. I am in the communication department. On the comm studies side, I'm a rhetorician. So I earned my PhD from the University of Memphis. I was in the program in rhetoric. And I love to look at womanist rhetoric and womanist preaching and African-American rhetoric. Those are particular areas of interest for me. Anything that deals with womanism, that deals with African Americans, that deals with social justice, I am totally game. So as you already heard, I have a book, which I will talk about that a little bit more as I talk about my writing process. And I have a book chapter that's going to be coming out soon. I've got a couple articles coming out soon, but then I also have an article that's published. It's called If Womanist Rhetoricians Could Speak. I have an encyclopedia definition. I've done a book review on Roadmap to Reconciliation. So, you know, I have some publications out, but I've got more on the way. So that's always good. And I just got tenure in 2018. So I'm sorry, not tenure. I got promoted to, well, yeah, tenure promotion. So I'm an associate professor at Tennessee State. Okay, so when we talk about the writing process, first and foremost, I treat anything that I write the same way. And so whether I'm writing for academia or whether I'm writing a sermon for the church, I always pray over what I'm writing. So if you are a person of faith, you should always cover whatever it is that you do in prayer. So that is my first tip to everyone. Then the next thing I do is I do the research. Whether it was the dissertation or an article or a book or book chapter, whatever, I just do the research because you have to show your committee or the publisher that you know the material that has been written on your topic. And if you're writing for a publisher, you also must be the authoritative voice on your topic. So the only way to be successful at any of that is to study and to just do the work. So I'll tell you about the writing process of turning the dissertation into a book. And I'll also tell you about the writing process for a book chapter and my latest article. So when it came to the dissertation and trying to convert that into a book, first let me say that this dissertation is 6 chapters long and it's 216 pages in length. And I wrote the dissertation chapters, each chapter in a month's time from November through April. And then the beginning of May, I handed over the entire manuscript to my advisor. And so you've got to think about, you know, in your writing process, how are you going to make time to write? And so that's how I organized my time. I wrote a chapter a month. The difference between writing for a PhD committee and a publisher is that your committee wants to know that you can quote the scholars. However, your publisher expects you to be the authoritative voice. So in this whole conversion process, of course, I had to take out some quotes. I simplified my table of contents because I wanted to make it user-friendly, reader-friendly. I created my own definitions for the womanist tenets as it relates to preaching. And part of that reason was because I, one, couldn't track down Stacey Floyd Thomas again. Sometimes she was just a little bit more difficult to get a hold of than others. And my publisher was saying that I needed her to sign off on something. And so I was just like, well, you know what? I'll just make up my own definitions. And so I did. I made up my own definitions in terms of, you know, what a womanist preacher is doing when a womanist preacher is excuse me, is focusing on one of the 4 womanist tenets. And I added new material. And this is the important thing, because your dissertation is already accessible to the public for free. So, you know, why in the world would a publisher want to go through the expense of publishing your book, which, you know, is basically an exact duplicate of your dissertation if you've not made any new changes? And so there definitely needs to be some new material in your book if you are trying to convert your dissertation into a book. And most importantly, I wrote a book that I wanted to read. And that tip I actually got from one of Renita Weems' books. I believe it's Just a Sister Away. In the acknowledgments, she talks about a friend who told her to write the books that you want to read. And so that always stuck with me. And if any of you are familiar with womanism, then, you know, when it comes to womanist rhetoric, and even when it comes to womanist preaching, there's not a lot of material out there to even consult. So I began to just write something that I would want to read as someone who's interested in both womanist rhetoric and womanist preaching. And here's the kicker. You have to edit your work, which is something that Dr. Annette said earlier. So let's see, prior to the dissertation project, I had been a research assistant, and then I also edited a good part of that project, actually. I spent a lot of time on one particular section. This was an anthology. It was about 1,000 pages long. And then the first section at the end, I went through that one too and did some edits. But anyway, I figured if I could give them 100% and, you know, make them look good, then I ought to be able to give myself 100%, because at the end of the day, it's my name that's going on that book. And so you need to make sure that you edit your own work and don't necessarily trust the editors of, you know, a book publisher, because at least in my experience, they outsourced the book to some editors, and I did a much better job. I caught way more errors in my manuscript than they did. They sent me about 7 queries, and when I read my manuscript from cover to cover, their queries were alphabetized. And so I sent mine back using the alphabet as well. Well, I went through the alphabet twice, and we all know that there are 26 letters in the alphabet. And so I went through it twice, and I was just like, okay, so AA, this is what we need to fix. BB, this is what we need to fix, you know, and so then they fixed that. I was able to pick the design. I was able to pick the image. Actually, I purchased this image and then asked my twin sister to purple it out for me. And let's see, this particular book is 177 pages in length. And as of this month, we've sold just over 400 copies, and it was published in 2017. So July 31st, it will be 3 years old. So I think it's doing pretty well. I really do. So now let me talk a little bit about the book chapter writing process. The book chapter that's going to be coming out is actually a chapter in the project that both Dr. Annette and Dr. Charisse are co-editors of. And so my chapter is actually called A Womanist Response to Black Lives Matter and American Nationalism, and it's in their book, Womanist Ethical Rhetoric, A Call for Liberation and Social Justice in Turbulent Times. So originally, I scheduled 2 weeks to write the chapter, but I quickly realized that I needed to do more research if I was going to be the authoritative voice on Black Lives Matter and American nationalism. So realistically, it took me 2 months to do the reading, just to familiarize myself with what was out there already in terms of Black Lives Matter and American nationalism. And then I wrote the chapter in 2 weeks. I then sent it to my personal editor. She read it, she loved it. And then I sent it to the editors, both Dr. Annette and Dr. Charisse. And they too loved it, which was always, that's always nice to hear. Okay, and so then the writing process for this latest article that got interrupted due to complications from a minor surgical procedure, and then a sinus infection, and then COVID-19 shelter in place. So this latest article that I'm about to send off to the editor, which this is going to Dr. Annette, and this article is called When Social Justice Activism Looks Like Redemptive Self-Love. And it will be eventually published in the Journal of Communication and Religion. So when I realized I couldn't make the March deadline, I, of course, contacted Dr. Annette because she's the editor. Then when I realized I couldn't make the April deadline, I contacted her again. You are as good as your word. So if you say that you're going to deliver something, then if you can't deliver it in the time frame that you say you're going to deliver it, then what you've heard today, I'm going to echo, you need to be in conversation with the editor. So then trying to get back into the rhythm of writing, that became very difficult for me, especially after closing out such a stressful semester. I joined a writing group earlier this month via Zoom, and I really enjoy it because we get to hold each other accountable. And the group has helped me to get back into my rhythm. And I'm in the process now of converting footnotes into APA in-text citations, and I'm creating the reference page. So I'm mostly proficient in Chicago manual style. So while I was writing, it was just easier for me to just write and, you know, keep going, stay in the rhythm, just use Chicago manual style. And then at the end, go back and convert. Even though I am familiar with APA and I am familiar with MLA, because with my students, I accept all three. But I am most proficient in Chicago manual style, and most of my academic writing has been in Chicago manual style because that's what they require. And so I have just a couple more general comments. I would say that you need to schedule some time, you know, to write. And I wish I could say that I was someone who writes 1 to 2 pages a day, or that I was someone who writes for 1 to 2 hours a day. But, you know, that's just not true for me. Now, I do schedule my time to write because I believe that that is important, and I believe that whatever we believe is important to us, we make time for. And so I will carve out some time, and I will carve out time during the week, and then sometimes on Saturdays. And then now, since it's summertime, I'm definitely carving out at least 3 hours on Fridays, in addition to the other time during the week, to do some writing, to, you know, get some projects done. So I would say that you have to figure out, when are you the most creative? Is it during the day, or is it at nighttime? I love to write at night. However, I am trying to acclimate myself to do more writing during the daytime so that I can actually sleep at night. However, I still crank out sermons at night whenever I'm asked to preach, because that's my sacred time. I just love it when it's quiet. Everything's quiet. It's dark. Nobody's bothering me. I know that my cell phone's not going to ring. It's not going to ding. It's not going to do anything. You know, it's just me and me and God, and I just get to work on the sermon and trying to make it make sense to whatever congregation that I'm going to be preaching to. So those are my tips for my writing process. If you have some questions, some comments, I'd love to hear from you, and we can definitely dialogue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Kimberly and Dr. Cerise, for sharing. And remember, the writing process, no matter what you're writing, there is a process involved. You need to, first of all, make the time. We talked about this yesterday. It's just making sure you set aside some time to actually do the writing and be consistent about that writing. So let's see.
Oh, I guess I did forget to say that I do outline what I'm writing that's one of the first things that I do. I'll create an outline just so that I have some kind of blueprint. And I'm someone who writes in a linear fashion from beginning to end. So I don't do that popcorn writing. That just doesn't work for me. I've got to see it from beginning to end, you know, straight shot.
And everybody has their own process when it comes to that, because some people aren't linear in their heads. They got to get it out first and then they line it up. So everybody has their own process, and there are so many different ways you can organize your writing. So just let's see. One of the other key things that is kind of fluid through this is write what you want to read. And I come back to this because I'm thinking about those children's books. And as I was doing, just looking up children's books for this this video reading program that I signed up for to help read to kids, I'm looking up the authors and the illustrators of the books for the African American or children of color stories.
Mm-hmm.
People are writing stories and getting published that don't look like us, and they're telling our stories. Some of them, they're good, but I know we are great as well. And so our voices should be creating the stories for our children and being published. And it's not that we're not doing it. There are barriers. There are gatekeepers that are in the way. And so now with the advent of self-publishing, we can do so much more to get our voices out there, to publish our work ourselves and have it illustrated and done ourselves in certain ways, instead of trying to wait for this big giant publisher to kind of pick up our work. Then our stories will never get out there, because there are other barriers that impede publication for Black people and people of color. So you might find some children's books with kids that look like our kids and members of our community, but they didn't come from our perspective or point of view. It's someone else telling our story. And so not saying that's a bad thing. Some of the stories are really great, but we can tell our stories. We can use our voices to tell our stories. So I just wanted to make sure to reiterate that, because we have the same issues come up with academic publishing. And so when you have a space or a way to open up a door to let people come in, it is that's what we do. And so that's what I do with Sister Circle writers, is make those connections. And then when it's available to include Black women's voices in publishing to be published, that's what I do. We open up and kind of let individuals through the gates. Because if you notice with some of the other publishing, it's a funnel, and only a certain number of people are going to get through. So you might find a couple authors and illustrators of color that have made it to those, you get Penguin Publishing and all those different places, but it's not broad like this, it's narrow like this. And so I just wanted to be clear about that. Did anybody have any questions before we break off into our writing time?
Dr. Annette, I wanted to...
Oh, here we go. Okay.
I wanted to show everyone, here's a book by a friend of mine. Her name is Dr. Yamonja Small. She's trained in psychology, and she also does art therapy. And she is the artist. If any of you have ever watched Empire, and if you remember Cookie's office, do you see this abstract painting? That's her work. She has work that's hanging in various galleries, right? And so this is a book that Dr. Y did. It's called The Day It Rained. And so she did all of her illustrations as well as, wrote this book for children. So I think that you're right, that this is hard to come by, but this is someone else's work that I just wanted to share with the group.
And that's what we do. And so now we can go to, she has a website?
She does. She also has a clothing line.
Okay.
Yeah, and her clothing line is Just Human. That's what it's called. Let me give you her name. Yemonja is spelled Yemonja, and Smalls, I will type it into the chat so that
Okay.
you can see it.
All right, and then we'll have that. Okay, so I have set up 2 breakout rooms, and they're just kind of manually sorted. And this is the time where you can network. And let me make sure. I'm gonna make sure that Dr. Johnson is in one room if you have questions, and then Dr. Glenn is in another room if you have questions. So. Make sure I do that. Yep, here we go. All right, so I'm going to open up the rooms, and then you guys can network, and we'll come back at noon to check in. So you can stay in the network if you like and just kind of talk things through. And then also if you need to like come out of that and just kind of go and write, you can do that as well. So it's like a networking, get your coffee, beverage of choice, and then do some writing, and then we'll check back in at noontime. Okay? All right.
All right.
Got it.
Thank you.
So let me do this.
What I thought I would do today is, well, for some of the people who weren't here yesterday, I think Sister Annette probably talked a little bit about what we did yesterday, but it was really about setting your intentions, your goals and your intentions for writing. We talked a little bit about yesterday about how even a short 5-minute, couple of minute meditation, what that does when you go back to writing. And so, you know, the recommendation and some of the research behind meditation and writing, or for writing, recommends that we meditate first and then we write. And meditation can be in all forms. It's not just the traditional way that we think about meditation. And sometimes it's, you know, just doing a scroll pattern on a piece of paper, anything that, you know, sort of gets you into a zone kind of thing. And so meditation is not always sitting and closing your eyes, although that is part of the way that I like to do things. But meditation can come in many forms, is what I wanted to start off with. And so today what I thought I might do and share with you is, there are 2 pieces that I'd like to just sort of read and have us think about as we continue on in the day with our writing practice. And so I was hoping that you guys would let me read these 2 pieces. And before I read these 2 pieces, I just ask for us to sort of take a comfortable sit or stance, or whatever way you're at home, in your space. I'm going to ask you to either close your eyes or sort of you know, look at an object or a point on your wall or something in front of you. Once again, I'm going to ask you to begin by just sitting comfortably, having your hands in a comfortable position, and just take 3 deep breaths. And so when we take our deep breaths to sort of clear our mind, and I talked a little bit about oxygen, right? When we take these deep breaths, we increase the amount of oxygen that we bring not only into our body, but also for our brain. And, you know, I don't know about you, but if you've ever written, sometimes I finish my writing days and I'm like, oh my God, why am I so tired, or feel like I'm worn out? And it is because sometimes when we're working so hard, we forget to breathe and we forget to increase that oxygen to our brain. And so I'm going to ask you to sit comfortably. You can either close your eyes or stare at an object and take 3 deep breaths. I want you to take a breath in through your nose and then let it out through your mouth. And once we take our 3 deep breaths, I'm going to ask you to sort of listen to a couple of pieces that I have about gratefulness. And I have to go to gratefulness right now because Dr. Annette and I were just talking about, and she said that she started off today with about the state of the world and where we're in. And so in order to clear my mind and to not be in that space and thinking about some of those things that are going on all around us, sometimes I just have to go to a gratefulness place, right? Because I imagine that it could be a lot worse than what it is right now. Although sometimes I worry about that, right? So let us start with our breathing. So pick a point or close your eyes. Take a deep breath through your nose. I ask you to hold it for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now breathe out. Now let's do that 2 more times. Hold it for a count of 4. And breathe out. Now take your last deep breath. And breathe out. Okay. So my first piece that I want to share with you comes from a network that is called Word for the Day. And I sort of collect these pieces, but it says, in times of turmoil and danger, gratitude helps to steady and ground us. It brings us into presence, and our full presence is perhaps the best offering we can make to our world. The next piece I want to read to you has to do with happiness. And it starts off like this. We are whole, WHOLE. We are whole. Our deepest happiness is intrinsic to the nature of our minds, and it is not damaged through uncertainty and change. I want to leave you with that. All right, Sister Annette, I'm going to let you take over.
About that. It is lunchtime, and so if you remember, I said have your snacks ready, beverage of choice, all those different things ready, because it is lunchtime for you. But our goal is still to get as much writing done as possible. So I am going to say we will be back at 1:30, and then we will just kind of like go around and say what we've done, and then we'll talk and see if you want to go back into your smaller groups to work and talk and share. But so I'm going to say that we are going to go and be productive and do some writing. And I'll see you at 1:30. Okay, ladies?
All right.
Okay.
Enjoy your snack.